Move your wrinkled ass, old man. This ain't bingo night. Danny Rourke barked it across the blue rail. Certain Elias Whitaker looked like easy sport. Alone, quiet, the kind of elderly man you push to feel powerful. The gang circled, mistaking stillness for weakness. To them, he was nothing, a target to humiliate. They didn't see years etched under his calm, the discipline of a retired karate instructor who taught patience and precision. When Danny's mockery turns violent and beer splashes down his collar, the joke becomes a threat that will force Elias to answer and expose a town's secrets. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The Blue Rail Bar hunched against the cold Friday night, its neon signs casting purple-red shadows through clouds of cigarette smoke. Inside, Elias Whitaker sat quietly at the corner of the bar, his navy sweater and crisp white collar a stark contrast to the worn leather jackets and faded denim around him. His weathered hands cradled a glass of ginger ale as he watched the basketball game playing silently on the TV above. The door swung open with a blast of winter air. Danny Rourke strode in first, his black leather jacket creaking as he moved. Switch and Ox flanked him like dark shadows, their tattoos visible beneath rolled-up sleeves. The jukebox skipped a beat as conversations died down. Regular customers suddenly found their drinks fascinating. Danny's eyes swept the room like searchlights until they landed on Elias. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He nudged Switch, nodding toward the old man. "Well, look what we got here, boys," Danny announced, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The professor's doing a little field research." His boots scraped against the floor as he approached. Grace Villarreal, working behind the bar, felt her shoulders tense. She'd seen that look in Danny's eyes before, the look that meant someone's night was about to get very bad. Her hand slipped into her apron pocket, brushing her phone. "Evening, old-timer," Danny said, leaning against the bar next to Elias. "Ain't it past your bedtime?" Elias took a small sip of his ginger ale, his expression calm and measured. He didn't respond. "Asked you a question, Professor." Danny's voice hardened. Switch circled around to Elias's other side, while Ox positioned himself behind, effectively boxing the older man in. The basketball game played on overhead, its squeaking sneakers and crowd noise a surreal backdrop to the growing tension. A few patrons edged toward the door. Switch's elbow slipped, knocking into Elias's drink. The glass wobbled, but didn't spill. "Oops," Switch sneered. "Almost made a mess there." Elias carefully set his glass down and started to stand, but Ox's massive frame blocked his path. "Going somewhere?" the big man rumbled. "Sit down, old-timer," Danny said, his hand pressing down on Elias's shoulder. "We're just getting to know each other." He grabbed his own fresh beer from the bar, holding it up to the light. "You know what this town needs? A little more integration." Grace's fingers wrapped around her phone, pulling it out slowly. She angled it just right, hidden behind the taps, and pressed record. Danny's grin widened as he tilted his beer. The amber liquid poured over Elias's head, soaking into his sweater and dripping down his face. The bar fell completely silent except for the steady drip of beer hitting the floor. Switch's high-pitched laugh broke the silence first. Then Ox's deep chuckle joined in. Danny's crew, scattered around the bar, added their own cruel laughter to the chorus. Beer ran down Elias's face, darkening his neat white collar. His eyes remained forward, dignity intact despite the humiliation. A few drops fell from his chin as Grace silently slid a bar towel toward him. The laughter continued as Elias picked up the towel with steady hands. He carefully folded it into quarters, movements precise and unhurried. The methodical way he wiped his face seemed to irritate Danny, whose smile began to fade around the edges. When Elias finally spoke, his voice was soft, but clear enough to cut through the dying laughter. "You should apologize." The room went completely still. The jukebox chose that moment to fall silent between songs, leaving only the muted sound of sneakers squeaking on the TV above. Every person in the bar seemed to hold their breath, watching the scene unfold. Danny's face froze, caught between amusement and anger. Switch's hand twitched toward his pocket, while Ox's massive shoulders tensed. Behind the bar, Grace's phone continued recording, capturing every second of the dangerous silence. The old man sat perfectly straight on his bar stool, beer still dripping from his sweater, his dignity somehow untouched by their attempt to destroy it. His calm request for an apology hung in the air like smoke, impossible to wave away. Danny's sneer twisted into something uglier as he stared down at the old man. "You want me to what?" He leaned in closer, beer breath hot against Elias's face. "Must have water in my ears, Professor. Thought you just told me to apologize." "I did." Elias's voice remained steady, his posture straight, despite the beer dripping from his sweater. The gang leader's laugh was sharp and mean. "That's funny, old-timer. Real funny." His hand shot out, shoving hard at Elias's chest. But where Danny expected resistance, he found only air. The old man had shifted, just slightly, just enough, causing Danny to stumble forward, catching himself on the bar. Confusion flickered across Danny's face. Before he could recover, Ox growled and grabbed Elias's shoulder from behind, meaty fingers digging in. "Got him, Danny." What happened next was so smooth, so precise, that later the witnesses would argue about exactly how it worked. Elias's hand moved like flowing water, finding Ox's wrist. His fingers locked around pressure points as his body turned, redirecting the bigger man's force. A subtle twist, a shift of weight, and suddenly Ox dropped to his knees with a yelp of pain, his arm trapped in Elias's efficient grip. "Hey!" Switch launched himself forward, switchblade appearing in his hand. But Elias was already moving, releasing Ox's wrist and pivoting on his back foot. His leg swept out in a perfect arc, catching Switch behind the ankles. The wiry man's momentum carried him forward as his feet went back. He crashed into a bar stool with a resounding clatter, knife skittering across the floor. The bar erupted in gasps and muttered exclamations. Someone whispered, "Holy shit." A phone camera clicked. Ox tried to surge up from his knees, but Elias's stance had already shifted to counter the movement. His hands remained open, never forming fists, as he redirected Ox's charge. The big man stumbled past him, crashing into Danny. "That's karate," someone murmured. "Real karate, not that strip mall stuff." "My cousin took lessons from him years ago," another voice added. "He used to teach at—" "Enough!" Danny's shout cut through the chatter. His face had gone red, but he forced a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Enough, enough. Stand down, boys." He waved at Ox and Switch, who were picking themselves up, looking dazed and angry. "The old-timer's got some moves. Respect, Professor. Respect." Danny raised his hands in an exaggerated gesture of peace, but his fingers trembled slightly. "Let me buy you a drink to replace the one we spilled. Hell, let me buy the whole bar around." He clapped Elias on the shoulder, grip just a little too tight. "No hard feelings, right?" The gathered crowd shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the false cheer in Danny's voice. Some nodded and smiled nervously, accepting the offered peace, but others saw the cold rage burning behind his casual grin. Elias remained perfectly still under Danny's hand, neither accepting nor rejecting the gesture. His breathing was calm and measured, as if he'd done nothing more strenuous than read his newspaper. Grace approached with a fresh towel, using the movement to lean close to Elias. "Got it all on video," she whispered, barely moving her lips. "Every second." Elias gave her the slightest nod, accepting both the towel and the information with quiet dignity. He dabbed at his sweater, though the beer had already soaked in deeply. "Come on, old-timer," Danny insisted, that dangerous smile still fixed in place. "Have another drink with us. We're all friends here, right?" "Thank you. No." Elias's voice was polite but firm as he stood, smoothing his ruined sweater. "I believe I'll call it a night." He moved toward the door with the same controlled grace he'd shown in the brief confrontation. The crowd parted automatically, some nodding respectfully, others still too stunned to react. Switch and Ox watched him with wary eyes, unconsciously rubbing their wrists and backs. The night air hit Elias's face as he stepped outside, cooling the beer-soaked fabric against his skin. The street was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the muffled music from the bar behind him. A few scattered snowflakes drifted down through the glow of the streetlights. Across the street, a black SUV sat motionless in the shadows, its engine humming quietly, headlights dark. But Elias didn't notice it as he began his walk home, his steps measured and dignified despite his damp clothes. Behind him, through the bar's windows, Danny watched him go. The false smile had vanished completely now, replaced by a mask of pure hatred as he absently rubbed his bruised pride. The cold night air bit at Elias's face as he walked through the alley behind the blue rail. His damp sweater clung uncomfortably to his skin, but his steps remained steady. Steam rose from his breath in gentle clouds as he hummed an old hymn, his wife's favorite, the one that always steadied his nerves. The buzzing fluorescent lights above the bar's back door flickered, casting jumping shadows across the wet pavement. A sudden movement caught his eye. Too late. The punch came from nowhere. Ox's massive fist driving into his ribs. Elias stumbled, breath rushing out in a sharp gasp. Before he could recover, Switch's arms locked around him from behind, pinning his elbows. "Thought you were pretty clever in there, didn't you?" Danny's voice drifted from the shadows. He stepped into the sickly light, rolling his shoulders as he approached. His knuckles cracked one by one, a deliberate, threatening rhythm. "Showing off your little karate moves, making us look stupid." Elias's mind cleared, training taking over. He regulated his breathing, just as he'd taught countless students. Assess, adapt, act. 3 against 1, Elias said quietly. "Is that what you need to feel strong?" Danny's smirk vanished. He nodded to Ox. The big man swung again, but this time Elias was ready. He dropped his weight suddenly, throwing Switch off balance. The punch whistled over his head as Elias drove his elbow back, finding the soft spot above Switch's hip. The grip loosened. Elias spun free, using the alley wall for support. His movements were precise, economical. No wasted energy. Ox charged like a bull, but Elias sidestepped, helping the momentum carry the larger man face first into the brick wall. The impact echoed through the alley. Switch recovered, slashing with another knife. Elias caught his wrist, twisted, and used the man's own momentum to send him sprawling into a dumpster with a hollow boom. The knife clattered away into a drain grate. Danny was different, trained, measured. He circled, looking for openings. His first combination was quick. Jab, cross, hook. Elias blocked, deflected, moved. The old teacher's breathing was heavier now, his age showing in the strain around his eyes, but his technique never wavered. "Getting tired, old man?" Danny taunted, pressing forward. Elias didn't waste breath responding. He waited, patient as always, for Danny to overextend. When it came, a wild right hook, Elias moved inside Danny's guard. His hip turned, hands found grip points, and suddenly Danny was airborne. He hit the wall hard, and Elias pinned him there with precise pressure on nerve clusters in his shoulder and wrist. Danny struggled, but the hold was perfect. Pain kept him still. "You could have walked away," Elias said softly, his breath visible in the cold air. "All of this. Your choice." Police sirens split the night. Red and blue lights painted the alley walls as a cruiser pulled up to the entrance. Chief Nolan stepped out, adjusting his belt as he surveyed the scene. "Evening, Danny," Nolan called, nodding to the gang leader. His tone was casual, familiar. "Having some trouble?" Elias released his hold immediately, stepping back with his hands visible. Danny rolled his shoulder, that dangerous smile returning to his face. "Chief," Danny said, straightening his jacket, "just caught this old-timer assaulting me and my boys. Jumped us from behind while we were taking out the trash. Isn't that right, boys?" Ox and Switch nodded, picking themselves up. Switch was holding his side where he'd hit the dumpster, but he managed to smirk. "That's not what happened." Grace burst through the back door of the bar, phone held out. "I have it all on video, from inside and just now. They followed him out here. They attacked him. Now. Chief Nolan's voice was smooth as he plucked the phone from her hand. "We'll need this for evidence. Due process and all that." He slipped the phone into his pocket, then pulled out his handcuffs. "Mr. Whitaker, you're under arrest for assaulting 3 men." "Chief," Elias began, "these men, you have the right to remain silent." Nolan cut him off, roughly cuffing Elias's wrists. "I suggest you use it." Grace tried to step forward, but Danny caught her arm. His grip looked gentle, but his fingers dug in. "Better get back to work," he said softly. "Bar's still open." The chief guided Elias into the back of the patrol car. The old man sat straight-backed despite his bound hands, face composed even as bruises began to darken around his ribs. Through the window he watched Danny light a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his triumphant expression. Chief Nolan paused by Danny, speaking low. Their faces were friendly, familiar, the easy manner of men who'd made deals before. The chief's hand came to rest on Danny's shoulder with a conspiratorial pat. Above them, power lines hummed in the cold night air, a web of connections running through the heart of the town. Everything was connected here: police, gangs, politics, a network of power that had just shown its true face. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead as Elias stood for his mugshot. His navy sweater was still damp, his white collar askew. The flash popped, once straight on, once from the side. Each snap of the camera felt like another small indignity. "Look straight ahead," the clerk muttered, typing into his computer. "Assault and battery." The keys clicked with finality. Elias's fingers trembled slightly as he signed the release papers, more from fatigue than fear. He'd spent the night in a holding cell, listening to drunks sing and watching roaches scurry along the walls. His ribs ached where Ox had landed that first sucker punch. "Your bail's been posted," the desk sergeant announced without looking up. "You're free to go. Court date's in 2 weeks." In the station's lobby, Mara waited with her arms crossed. His daughter's medical scrubs were wrinkled. She'd come straight from her night shift at the hospital. The disappointment in her eyes cut deeper than any of last night's bruises. "Really, Dad?" she started as soon as they were outside. "Bar fights? At your age?" "It wasn't like that, Mara." Elias's voice was tired, but firm. "It never is." She unlocked her car, a sensible hybrid that smelled of hand sanitizer. "Get in. You need breakfast, and we need to talk." They found a quiet diner a few blocks away. The morning sun streamed through grimy windows, catching dust motes in its beams. A tired waitress brought coffee without asking. "3 men, Dad. The police report says you attacked 3 men." Mara stirred her coffee violently, the spoon clinking against ceramic. "What were you thinking?" "They attacked me," Elias said quietly. "I defended myself. just like I taught my students. Your students. Mara's laugh was bitter. Always your students. The old wound opened between them, familiar and raw. Elias stared into his coffee cup, seeing years of missed dinners, tournaments that took precedence over school plays, the dojo that became his second home while Mara grew up with a part-time father. I was trying to help those kids, he said softly. Give them discipline, direction. Other people's kids. Mara's voice cracked slightly. You were always there for other people's kids. Teaching karate, staying late at school for parent conferences, running that mentoring program. Meanwhile, I had to learn to drive from Mom because you were too busy with your calling. The waitress brought plates of eggs and toast. Neither touched their food. I thought I was doing right, Elias said. Building something good in the community. The community. Mara pushed her plate away. And look how they repay you. Locked up overnight while those thugs walk free. They drove in silence through the morning traffic. The town was waking up, shopkeepers raising metal gates, early church bells calling the faithful. As they passed St. Elijah's, a familiar figure in a bright floral dress waved them down. Pull over, Elias said. Mrs. Geneva Parks stood on the church steps like a sentinel, her silver hair catching the sun. At 80, she was still the moral backbone of the congregation, feared by sinners and respected by saints. Heard what happened, she said, as Elias approached. Her dark eyes were sharp with concern. Those boys think they run this town now, hiding behind badges and politics. It's being handled, Mrs. Parks, Elias assured her. Handled? She snorted. Like they handled that Williams boy last summer? Or Miss Chen's store getting vandalized? She reached out, taking Elias's hand in both of hers. They count on our silence, son. Don't you give it to them. In the car, Mara watched the exchange with a mixture of respect and worry. Mrs. Parks had been a fixture in their lives, at Myra's funeral, at school board meetings, leading prayers and protests with equal fervor. Back home, Elias stood in his modest living room. Decades of memories surrounded him. Trophies from tournaments, photos of students in white Gs, certificates and community awards. On the mantel, Myra smiled from their wedding photo, young and radiant in white lace. He picked up the frame, thumb brushing the glass. Myra had believed in him, in his teaching, in the power of patience and discipline to change lives. She'd supported his long hours at the dojo, understanding that some callings went beyond family. But she'd also seen Mara's hurt, tried to bridge the gap between father and daughter. I'm not done fighting, Myra, he whispered to the photo. Not yet. From the kitchen, Mara watched her father. How his shoulders stayed straight despite the night in jail. How his hands remained steady even after the fight. She remembered watching him teach when she was young, before the resentment set in. His voice had always been calm, even when correcting stances or explaining complex moves. Discipline isn't about hurting others, he'd say. It's about controlling yourself. The morning light streamed through the windows, warming the hardwood floors. Outside, cars passed, people went about their lives. And somewhere in town, Danny and his crew probably thought they'd taught the old man a lesson. The bruises on Elias's ribs throbbed with each breath, but his spine remained straight, his head high. The evening shadows stretched long across Elias's front lawn when a soft knock came at his door. Grace stood on the porch, still in her bartender's apron, dark circles under her eyes from a double shift. Mr. Whitaker, she said, glancing over her shoulder. Can I come in? Elias ushered her inside, noting how her hands fidgeted with the strap of her small bag. The living room lights cast a warm glow over photos of his karate students and teaching days. I brought you something, Grace said, pulling out a small USB drive. Before Chief Nolan took my phone, I had already backed up the video to my laptop. The whole thing, from the first beer pour to the alley attack. Elias took the drive, turning it over in his weathered hands. "Thank you, Grace. But this could cause trouble for you." "I'm used to trouble." She sank into an armchair, exhaustion evident in her posture. "2 months ago, I filmed Danny's crew roughing up old Mr. Chen outside his store. The next day, someone slashed my tires. Last summer, I caught Switch breaking a homeless man's shopping cart. My apartment window got broken that night. You kept filming anyway?" "Someone has to witness," Grace said firmly. "My mom taught me that. She cleaned houses for rich folks who treated her like she was invisible. But being invisible means you see everything." Elias nodded, understanding deeper than words. He'd learned similar lessons teaching in public schools, how power worked through small humiliations, how silence became complicity. Across town at the police station, Latour Miles Chen frowned at his computer screen. The timeline didn't add up. Body camera footage from 3 officers showed mysterious gaps during the hours of Elias's arrest. Standard procedure required continuous recording during any confrontation. Miles remembered being 14, struggling with anger after his father left. He'd shuffle into Elias's dojo, all teenage attitude and hurt. "Breathe first," Elias would say. "A clear mind sees truth." Now, 20 years later, the truth seemed deliberately clouded. He pulled up Chief Nolan's incident report. The timestamps were wrong. Officers arrived too quickly after the bar incident, almost as if they'd been waiting nearby. Miles's fingers hovered over his keyboard, remembering Elias's lessons about courage and integrity. At Town Hall, the wood-paneled corridors felt empty and cold. Councilman Patrick Hale's expensive shoes clicked against marble as he approached Chief Nolan by the water cooler. "We need this contained," Hale murmured, his politician's smile never reaching his eyes. "Danny's crew handles security for half our municipal projects. The waste management contract alone." "I've got it under control," Nolan replied, voice equally low. "The girl's phone is locked up, and the old man's facing charges. Make them stick. We can't have people thinking they can challenge the natural order around here." Back in Elias's living room, Grace pulled up a secure cloud storage site on her tablet. "We can upload it here first, then share it with local news sites. Once it's out there, they can't bury it." "You understand what you're risking?" Elias asked. "This goes beyond Danny and his thugs. There's money involved, contracts." "I understand fear, Mr. Whitaker." Grace's fingers moved across the screen. "I also understand that fear only works when we're alone. But we're not alone anymore." They watched the video together. The footage was clear. Danny's deliberate provocation, the beer poured slowly over Elias's head, the controlled defense in the bar, and finally the brutal ambush in the alley. The truth, unfiltered and undeniable. "My father was a civil rights photographer," Grace said softly. "He always said the camera was his weapon against lies. They broke his camera once, but they couldn't break his nerve." Elias thought of his own students over the years, hundreds of young people he'd taught to stand straight, to breathe deeply, to face challenges with dignity. He thought of Mara's words about choosing other people's children over her. Maybe this was a chance to show her that those lessons mattered, that standing up wasn't just about fighting. "Do it," he said. Grace's apartment was small but neat, with protest posters on the walls and potted herbs in the window. Her laptop hummed as the video uploaded to the private cloud storage. Each percentage point felt like another brick in a wall of truth they were building. "Once this goes public," Grace said, watching the progress bar, "there's no going back." "There was no going back the moment Danny decided to make an example of me," Elias replied. "He just chose the wrong person to make an example of." Outside her ground-floor apartment, a dark car rolled past, engine purring quietly. Inside, Danny pressed his phone to his ear, watching the warm light from Grace's window. They think they can outsmart me? He whispered into the phone. Let's remind them who owns this town. The progress bar reached 100%. Grace closed her laptop, not seeing the car outside, not hearing the whispered threats. For now, the truth was safe in the cloud, waiting like a sword of justice about to fall. Morning sunlight streamed through Grace's apartment window as she hit publish on the 2-minute video clip. Her hands trembled slightly as she shared the link to local community groups. Within hours, notifications began flooding her phone. The footage showed everything clearly. Danny pouring beer over Elias's head, the elderly man's dignified response, and his precise, controlled defense when attacked. The bar's neon signs cast harsh shadows that made the violence feel even more stark and real. By noon, the clip had spread across the town's social media networks like wildfire. Comments poured in. That's Elias Whitaker. He taught my kids karate for years. Those thugs got what they deserved. This has to be staged. No old man moves like that. Typical troublemakers trying to stir things up. At the local diner, regulars huddled over phones, showing each other the video. The owner, Mrs. Chen, watched it 3 times, remembering how Danny's crew had protected her restaurant last year for a fee. Emergency town hall meeting posters appeared by mid-afternoon. The crowd that gathered filled every seat in the municipal building's main chamber. The air felt electric with tension. Councilman Hale stood at the podium, his expensive suit and practiced smile a stark contrast to the working-class audience. He held up a printed screenshot from the video. Now, folks, he began, his voice smooth as oil. We've all seen this production. And that's exactly what it is. A staged incident designed to create division in our community. These internet hoaxes are becoming more sophisticated every day. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others scowled. Grace sat near the back, her phone still recording. Furthermore, Hale continued, we should question the timing. Just as we're implementing new security measures downtown, suddenly this appears? Trying to paint our local security contractors as villains? Elias rose slowly from his seat in the middle row. His navy sweater was freshly pressed, his white collar crisp. The room hushed as he made his way to the microphone. My name is Elias Whitaker, he said, his voice steady and clear. I taught at Lincoln High for 30 years. Taught karate to hundreds of kids in this town. Some of their children, too. He paused, looking directly at Hale. I taught respect for 40 years. I won't start bowing now. Mrs. Geneva Parks stood next, her church hat bobbing as she moved to the front. I've known Elias since he married my dear friend Myra. That man has more honor in his little finger than some folks have in their whole body. She fixed the council with a stern gaze. He fought back with honor, not hate, and shame on anyone who'd rather protect bullies than truth. From his seat near the wall, Latour Miles Chen watched the room's dynamics. Earlier that day, he'd discovered something interesting in the municipal records. Hale's committee had approved nearly $500,000 in no-bid security contracts to Rourke Protective Services, Danny's company. The paperwork was buried in subsections of maintenance agreements. More residents stood to speak. A former student of Elias's described how karate lessons had helped him overcome bullying. A nurse who'd worked with Mara praised Elias's character, but others defended the council, questioning why an old man was at a bar alone, suggesting he'd provoked the incident. The meeting stretched for hours. Hale kept trying to steer the conversation toward internet security and false narratives, but the video's reality was hard to dismiss. The raw footage showed what happened, plain and simple. Afterward, people lingered in small groups outside town hall. Geneva hugged Elias, whispering encouragement. Grace checked her phone. The video had reached regional news sites. Miles quietly copied more financial records to a secure drive. Walking home in the evening cool, Elias felt both energized and exhausted. The streets seemed different now, charged with possibility and danger. Neighbors waved from porches, some encouraging, some wary. He climbed his front steps, noticing a white envelope that had been slipped under his door. Inside was a single typed line. "Drop this, old man, or we'll finish what we started." Elias held the paper to the porch light, studying the threat's clean typeface. After 40 years of teaching, he knew bullies' tactics well. Escalate when challenged, threaten when exposed. He folded the note carefully and placed it in his pocket. Evidence for later. Inside his home, the evening news played quietly on TV. The local anchor was discussing the viral video, showing a still frame of the blue rail's exterior. His phone buzzed, Mara checking in, worried but proud. Another text from Grace. The clip had passed 50,000 views. The truth was out now, spreading like ripples in a pond. Each wave reached further, touching more lives, revealing more connections. In their rush to intimidate one old man, Danny and his crew had exposed something bigger than themselves, a web of power, money, and silence that had gripped the town for too long. Elias sat in his favorite chair, where he used to grade papers and plan karate lessons. The anonymous threat crinkled in his pocket. But threats only worked when fear outweighed principles. And he'd spent a lifetime teaching that principle mattered most. Early morning light filtered through the windows of May's Corner Cafe as Lieutenant Miles Chen slid into the booth across from Elias. The diner was nearly empty, just a few regulars nursing coffee at the counter. Miles had chosen this spot carefully, far from the police station and Hale's usual haunts. "Thank you for meeting me," Miles said softly, removing his badge and placing it face down on the table. A signal this was unofficial. "There's something you need to know about what's happening." Elias stirred his tea, watching his former student with patient eyes. The boy he'd taught roundhouse kicks to had grown into a thoughtful man with careful movements and watchful eyes. "Chief Nolan isn't just protecting Danny out of prejudice," Miles continued, sliding a manila folder across the table. "It's about money. These are copies of municipal contracts I found. Danny's security company has nearly $500,000 in no-bid deals with the city." Elias opened the folder, scanning documents filled with bureaucratic language and large numbers. "Legitimate business?" "On paper." Miles leaned forward. "But look at the dates. Each contract was approved right after incidents near businesses that complained about Danny's crew. First they cause trouble, then they get paid to prevent it." The bell above the diner door chimed. Grace hurried in, carrying her laptop. She slid into the booth next to Elias, glancing around before opening the screen. "You need to see this," she said, pulling up a video file. "Remember Ted, the guy who delivers beer to the Blue Rail? His truck has a dash cam. He was parked in the back lot that night. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Danny's crew surrounding Elias in the alley, Ox throwing the first punch, the entire ambush captured from a high angle. The timestamp was unmistakable. "This proves self-defense," Miles said, studying the video, "and contradicts the official report completely." Grace nodded. "Ted was scared to come forward, but he gave me a copy last night. Said he couldn't sleep, knowing what really happened." Miles pulled out another set of papers, photocopied police logs. "I managed to get these from dispatch. Notice the pattern? Whenever someone reports Danny's crew, Nolan either delays the response or redirects officers to higher priority calls. But when Danny calls about troublemakers, response time is under 3 minutes." Elias studied the logs, remembering faces of people who'd been harassed, driven away, or forced to pay for protection. Each incident represented someone who'd faced what he had, but without the ability to fight back. "We need more," he said finally. If we're going to expose this, we need everything documented perfectly. The diner door opened again. Mara walked in, still wearing scrubs from her night shift. She carried her medical bag, her expression a mix of concern and determination. "I can help with that," she said, sitting down. "I'm still not sure about all this, Dad, but—" She pulled out a camera. "Let me photograph your injuries. Document the timeline. If this goes to court, we'll need medical evidence." Elias rolled up his sleeve, revealing dark bruises from the alley fight. Mara photographed them clinically, measuring and noting each mark. Her hands were gentle, but professional. "The ribs, too," she said softly. "I need to check them again anyway." While Mara worked, Miles and Grace organized their evidence. The dashcam footage, radio logs, contract documents, and medical records began forming a clear pattern of corruption and violence. "We should contact state investigators," Miles suggested. "This is too big for internal affairs. Nolan has too many friends there. But we need to be careful," Grace added. "If they suspect we're building a case—" "They already do," Elias said quietly. "They're watching all of us now." The group worked through the morning, creating copies of everything, storing files in multiple secure locations. Grace set up encrypted cloud storage. Miles made notes about which officers might be willing to testify. Mara completed her medical documentation with precise detail. Around noon, other customers began filling the diner. The group separated casually, leaving at different times to avoid attention. Elias took his evidence folder home, secure in a false bottom briefcase Miles had provided. That evening, he sat at his desk reviewing everything they'd gathered. The pieces were coming together, a story of systematic intimidation and corruption that went beyond simple thuggery. Danny wasn't just a bully. He was a tool being used by more powerful men to maintain control through fear. As Elias studied the contract documents again, movement caught his eye. Through his front window, he saw headlights approaching slowly. The vehicle paused outside his house, engine idling. The same black SUV from the bar, now watching his home. After a long moment, it pulled away, tires crunching softly on the quiet street. Sunday morning sunlight streamed through St. Elijah's tall windows, warming the wooden floors of the community hall. Outside, the church bells chimed 9 times as people began arriving, carrying folding chairs and thermoses of coffee. Mrs. Geneva Parks stood at the entrance, greeting each person with a firm handshake and unwavering eye contact. "Take your seats anywhere," she directed, her voice carrying authority earned through decades of community service. "And keep those phones ready. We're done hiding in the shadows." Inside, Elias stood near the front, dressed in his familiar navy sweater and white collar. He'd pushed the furniture against the walls, creating an open space in the center. Mara helped arrange chairs in a wide circle, checking her father's movements for any signs of pain from his injuries. "You sure about this?" she whispered. Elias nodded. "Sometimes the best defense is showing others they can defend themselves." The hall filled quickly. Church elders settled into their chairs, some carrying canes or walkers. Younger folks stood along the walls, phones casually but purposefully held at ready angles. Grace sat near the door, her laptop open, monitoring the backup copies of their evidence. Geneva called the meeting to order by simply standing. The room fell silent. "We're here," she announced, "because silence has cost us too much. Mr. Whitaker isn't just going to show us how to stay safe. He's showing us how to stand tall." Elias stepped forward, his movements measured and precise. "First rule of self-defense," he said, voice clear and calm, "is knowing you deserve to be safe. Age doesn't change that. Race doesn't change that. Nothing changes that." He demonstrated a simple wrist release, showing how even arthritic hands could break a grip. Mrs. Johnson, 83 and barely 5 feet tall, volunteered first. When she successfully broke free from Elias's gentle hold, her triumphant laugh sparked something in the room, a crack in the fear. "Remember," Elias continued, "you don't need strength, you need technique." He showed them how to fall safely, how to create space, how to use their voice. "The loudest weapon we have is no." The tension dissolved further as more people tried the moves. Even Pastor Williams, with his bad hip, managed to practice a stable stance. Young parents brought their children forward, and Elias adapted the lessons for small hands and eager minds. Lieutenant Miles Chen arrived in civilian clothes, nodding to Elias before taking a spot near the back. His presence, a police officer choosing to stand with them, sent ripples through the crowd. When he raised his hand to speak, the room hushed. "What happened to Mr. Whitaker?" Miles said, standing straight. "Wasn't just an assault. It was a message. Stay quiet. Stay scared. But I've known this man since I was 14. He taught me that real strength isn't in throwing punches. It's in standing up for what's right." He paused, knowing his next words could cost him his badge. "Tomorrow, the truth comes out. All of it. And I'm standing with him." Grace closed her laptop and stood. "The full video drops at 9 a.m. Not just the bar fight, everything. The ambush, the contracts, the cover-up. We've got backups of the backups. They can't bury this anymore." A murmur ran through the crowd. Hope, like sunshine through storm clouds, began to warm the room. Geneva moved to the center, her spine straight as a church spire. "Look around," she commanded. "Remember these faces. Tomorrow, when they try to tell you what you didn't see, remember this moment. Remember we stand together." The energy shifted. People who had been avoiding eye contact now exchanged phone numbers. Elderly neighbors who had stayed behind locked doors made plans to check on each other. Young activists connected with community elders, bridging generations of silence. Elias led them through one final exercise, standing in a circle, feet planted firmly, voices rising together in a clear, strong "No!" The sound filled the hall, echoed off the walls, vibrated through the floorboards. It was more than practice. It was a declaration. As the meeting wound down, people lingered, sharing coffee and stories. Mrs. Johnson taught her granddaughter the wrist release. Pastor Williams practiced stable stances with his teenage ushers. Miles spoke quietly with a group of concerned parents. Grace backed up her files one last time while Geneva organized a phone tree. Mara watched her father demonstrate a simple block to an elderly couple, his patience and dignity touching something deep in her memory. The father she'd known before grief and distance had built walls between them. The community hall buzzed with renewed purpose. Neighbors who had looked away now looked each other in the eye. The word justice passed from person to person, no longer a distant dream, but a coming reality. Across the street, parked beneath a leafless oak tree, a black sedan idled. Inside, a figure in a dark hoodie held a phone to their ear, whispering threats into the cold morning air. But their words couldn't reach through the warmth and solidarity filling St. Elijah's Hall, where a community had finally found its voice. A flash of orange light pierced the midnight darkness, followed by a thunderous boom that shook windows for blocks. Grace's silver Civic erupted in flames outside her apartment building, the heat so intense it cracked her bedroom window. She stood frozen at her desk, the backup tablet clutched to her chest, watching as her only means of transportation became a twisted mass of burning metal. Sirens wailed in the distance as neighbors poured onto their balconies. Grace's hands trembled as she dialed Elias's number. Her voice cracked when he answered. They bombed my car." Within 15 minutes, Elias's old Toyota pulled up to the curb. He climbed out slowly, one hand pressed against his ribs, watching firefighters douse the last of the flames. Grace ran to him, fighting tears. "Are you hurt?" he asked, scanning her face. She shook her head. "I was upstairs working. If I'd been in the car—" "That was the point," Elias said grimly. "To scare you." He glanced at the tablet she still clutched. "Is everything backed up?" "Triple copies, different clouds." Grace's voice steadied. "They can't erase this." Red and blue lights flashed as more police cars arrived. Chief Nolan stepped out of one, adjusting his badge with practiced authority. His eyes locked onto Elias and Grace. "Quite a disturbance," he said, walking over. "Miss Villarreal, we'll need a statement." "I'll be filing it with the state police," Grace replied coldly. Nolan's smile didn't reach his eyes. "As you wish. But remember, false accusations have consequences." Dawn was breaking when Grace finally agreed to leave with Elias. He insisted she stay at his house, away from the apartment where everyone knew to find her. They drove in tense silence until Grace whispered, "They're not going to stop, are they?" "No," Elias answered honestly, "but neither are we." The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when heavy boots thundered up Grace's apartment stairs. A squad of officers, led by Nolan himself, burst through her door with a warrant held high. They found only her elderly neighbor, who watched in horror as they ransacked the empty apartment. "Cyber harassment investigation," Nolan announced to the growing crowd of onlookers. "Very serious charges." He made a show of bagging Grace's spare laptop and external drives, though the real evidence was safely hidden elsewhere. Across town, Elias stepped out to get his morning paper. The attack came swift and silent. 3 men in ski masks, definitely not locals. They moved with military precision, nothing like Danny's crew. Elias blocked the first punch, but caught a knee to his already tender ribs. Pain exploded through his chest. Still, decades of training took over. He dropped one attacker with a precise strike to the solar plexus, swept another's legs from under him, but the third landed a solid hit to his injured side. Elias stumbled, vision blurring. The sound of a car door opening nearby scattered his attackers like roaches from light. Mrs. Peterson from next door rushed out in her bathrobe, wielding a phone. "I've got you on video," she shouted, "and I'm sending it everywhere." At the police station, Lieutenant Miles Chen stood before Chief Nolan's desk, badge and gun already removed. "This isn't law enforcement," Miles said. "It's thuggery with a badge." "Turn in your credentials," Nolan replied without looking up. "Effective immediately." "Insubordination and unauthorized investigation of superior officers." "You mean discovering your corruption?" Miles placed his badge on the desk with deliberate care. "I learned honor from Mr. Whitaker, something you wouldn't understand." "Get out," Nolan snapped. "And remember, crossing the thin blue line has consequences." By afternoon, Grace's cloud accounts were mysteriously locked. Error messages claimed terms of service violations. The video evidence vanished folder by folder, despite her precautions. Her backup email addresses went dark. Years of technical experience erased by someone with higher access. Evening found Elias alone in his study, holding an ice pack to his ribs. Every breath brought fresh pain. On his desk sat his wife's photograph. Myra in her Sunday best, smiling that smile that had sustained him through 40 years of marriage. Beside it lay a stack of medical bills and legal notices. He touched his bruised side, feeling every one of his 72 years. The weight of it all, the violence, the corruption, the sheer exhaustion of fighting, pressed down like a physical thing. "Maybe I am too old for this, Myra," he whispered to her photograph. "Maybe it's time to let it go." His phone rang, startling him. Geneva's familiar voice came through strong and clear. "No, Elias. You're just seasoned." Looking at his wife's photo, he remembered her favorite saying, "Age is wisdom wrapped in aches." The pain in his side seemed to pulse with each heartbeat, but something else pulsed stronger. the certainty that backing down now would dishonor everything he'd spent his life teaching. The lights of passing cars cast moving shadows across the walls. In the street outside, someone's car alarm wailed briefly, then fell silent. Elias sat in his chair, holding both his injury and his resolve, while Geneva's words echoed in his mind. Not too old, just seasoned, like steel tempered by fire. Morning sunlight filtered through Elias's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. His ribs throbbed with each breath as he heard the gentle knock at his front door. Geneva Parks stood on his porch, wrapped in her Sunday shawl despite it being Tuesday, holding a ceramic teapot that had probably seen decades of similar visits. "Chamomile and honey," she said, not waiting for an invitation as she stepped inside. "My grandmother's cure for troubled spirits." They sat at his small kitchen table, the silence broken only by the quiet pour of tea into china cups. Steam rose between them like prayers. Geneva's weathered hands wrapped around her cup, her rings catching the morning light. "When I was a girl," Geneva finally spoke, her voice soft but firm, "my daddy taught me about young trees in a storm. The ones that stand rigid, they snap, but the ones that bend with the wind, they survive to grow stronger." She reached across and touched his hand. "Bend, don't break." Elias nodded slowly, understanding flowing between them deeper than words. The doorbell rang again, Mara, this time, her nurse's kit tucked under her arm, worry etched across her face. "Let me see," she commanded, doctor voice in full effect. Elias unbuttoned his shirt, revealing the purple-black bruising along his right side. Mara's hands were gentle as she probed the injury, but her jaw clenched at what she found. "2 cracked ribs," she diagnosed. "You're lucky they're not completely broken." She began unrolling an elastic bandage, her movements precise and practiced. "I should report this." "It wouldn't help," Elias said softly. "No," Mara agreed, starting to wrap his torso. "But I'm not letting you face this alone anymore." Her hands paused. "I found Mom's old letter yesterday, the one about your students." She swallowed hard. "About why you taught them. Why you stayed late at the dojo all those nights." "Mara." "No. Let me finish." She resumed wrapping. "She wrote about this boy who came to you, covered in bruises, how you gave him private lessons, no charge, how he grew from terrified to confident." Her voice wavered. "That was Miles Chen, wasn't it?" Elias nodded, remembering the frightened 14-year-old Miles had been. Before he could respond, another knock announced Miles himself, now in civilian clothes instead of his uniform. "Speaking of the devil," Geneva smiled, pouring another cup of tea. Miles accepted the cup, but remained standing, tension visible in his shoulders. "I've been making calls to old academy friends. The state police have had their eye on Nolan for months. They're gathering evidence, but quietly." "How quietly?" Elias asked. "Quiet enough that Nolan doesn't know, but not quiet enough to stop what's coming." Miles set his cup down. "Grace is on her way. She has something you need to see." Grace arrived minutes later, clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield. Her eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep, but they blazed with determination. "They thought they erased everything," she said, powering up the device. "But I'm not stupid. I kept an encrypted backup at my cousin's house in the next county." The tablet came to life, revealing folder after folder of video files. The original bar incident, the alley attack, timestamps, radio logs, financial records linking Danny's crew to city contracts. "Everything," Grace said. "Plus, I set up a dead man's switch. If anything happens to me, it all goes public automatically." Geneva's eyes sparkled. "The Lord helps those who help themselves." They gathered closer as Grace laid out her plan. The tablet could broadcast live to multiple platforms simultaneously. With the right timing and enough witnesses, They could force a confrontation that couldn't be buried or denied. The blue rail, Elias said thoughtfully. Where it all started. Mara's hands tightened on her medical kit. Dad, no. Your ribs need to heal, he finished. And they will. But some things can't wait for perfect conditions. Miles leaned forward. I can get word to my contacts. Make sure the right eyes are watching at the right time. And I'll rally the congregation, Geneva added. Fill those bar stools with witnesses Danny can't intimidate. Grace's fingers flew over the tablet, creating backup plans for her backup plans. We'll need multiple angles. I can set up remote cameras, trigger them from my phone. They spent the next hour refining details, each person adding their expertise. Mara insisted on medical contingencies. Miles mapped out tactical positions. Geneva listed which church members could be trusted to film without flinching. The morning light grew stronger, transforming Elias's kitchen into a war room of sorts. Teacups sat forgotten as they worked, their determination building with each refined detail. It has to be public, Elias said firmly, in full daylight, with the whole town watching. No more shadows, no more alley fights. Geneva reached for the teapot, refilling cups that had grown cold. When David faced Goliath, he did it in front of 2 armies, she said. Sometimes the witnessing is as important as the fighting. They migrated to Geneva's church basement as the plan took final shape. The old building's stone walls offered privacy, and the single bulb swaying overhead cast their faces in stark relief as they huddled around a folding table. Elias looked at each face in turn. His daughter, his former student, the brave young bartender, the indomitable church elder. The pain in his side felt distant now, overshadowed by the strength he drew from their presence. His eyes hardened with resolve. This time, he said, we finish it in daylight. Saturday night descended on the blue rail like a held breath. The usual cigarette haze hung thicker than normal, mingling with tension that made the air feel electric. Every bar stool was occupied, and the standing room pressed shoulder to shoulder against walls covered in neon beer signs and faded photos. Mrs. Geneva Parks sat primly at a corner table, surrounded by a dozen church elders who nursed coffee cups instead of beer mugs. Their presence drew curious glances from the regulars. A local news reporter tried to look casual near the jukebox, her press badge partially hidden but visible enough to matter. Altis. Miles Chen, out of uniform, leaned against the back wall where he could see both entrances. Grace moved behind the bar with practiced ease, though her hands trembled slightly as she poured drinks. The tablet tucked beneath the counter was already running, multiple camera feeds ready to go live with one touch. She'd positioned small cameras throughout the bar earlier that day, disguised as everyday objects, a clock, a phone charger, even a tip jar. Mara Whitaker stood near the emergency exit, her medical kit disguised in a large purse. She watched the door like a hawk, counting each person who entered, categorizing potential threats with her nurse's eye for detail. The bruising on her father's ribs had barely started to fade, and she silently prayed he could handle what was coming. At exactly 9 o'clock, the bar's front door opened. Elias Whitaker stepped inside, and the ambient chatter dipped noticeably. He wore the same navy sweater he'd worn that first night, freshly cleaned and pressed, the white collar crisp against his dark skin. His silver hair caught the neon light like a crown. Heads turned to track his movement as he walked to the center of the room. His cane tapped softly against the wooden floor, a sound that carried in the sudden quiet. He stood straight despite his ribs, shoulders squared, eyes calm but alert. "Good evening," he said, his voice pitched to carry. "I'm looking for Danny Rourke." Someone whispered, "Here we go," and phones started appearing in hands around the room. Grace's fingers hovered over her tablet. Ready. The door swung open again. Danny strode in, flanked by Switch and Ox. His leather jacket creaked as he moved, tattoos visible on his neck above the collar. He made a show of looking surprised. "Well, look who came back for more lessons," Danny smirked, spreading his arms wide. "The Karate Kid himself." Switch and Ox chuckled on cue. Elias turned to face him fully. "No lessons tonight, Mr. Rourke. I came to offer you a choice." "A choice?" Danny's eyebrows rose in mock interest. The crowd pressed closer, phones recording openly now. "Yes." Elias's voice remained steady. "You can apologize for what you did. To me and to others you've hurt in this town. We can end this properly, with dignity." Danny's laugh was sharp and cruel. "Apologize? To you?" He looked around the bar, playing to his audience. "Hear that, folks? The old man wants me to say sorry." Geneva's voice cut through the resulting chuckles. "Show some respect, young man." Danny's eyes narrowed at the interruption. "Respect? Like this town respected me when I was growing up? Like the fancy folks up on the hill respect any of us?" His voice grew harder. "I earned my place. Nobody gave me anything. And that gives you the right to hurt people?" Elias asked quietly. Grace's hand moved under the bar. Multiple screens around town suddenly lit up with her live stream, split between the current scene and footage from that first night. Danny's face contorted as he recognized himself pouring beer over Elias's head. "You think your little videos scare me?" Danny snarled, taking a step forward. The crowd shifted uneasily. "You think I care what these people think?" "I think you care very much," Elias replied. "Or you wouldn't work so hard to look powerful." Danny's face flushed red. "I am powerful, old man. I own this town. Ask your cop friends. Ask the council." He jabbed a finger toward Elias's chest. "You're nothing but a washed-up teacher who couldn't mind his own business. Is that what you tell yourself?" Elias didn't back away. "That hurting people makes you strong?" "Shut up." Danny's control was slipping. Veins stood out on his neck. "You have a choice," Elias repeated. "Make it right, or show everyone who you really are." The live stream numbers were climbing. Hundreds watching now, then thousands. Grace's backup footage played in an endless loop beside the main feed, showing the original assault, the alley attack, everything they'd tried to hide. Danny's eyes darted around the room, seeing phones everywhere, recording every moment. His carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time. Switch and Ox looked uncertain, sensing the shift in power. "You think you're better than me?" Danny's voice shook with rage. "You and your fancy sweater, acting all superior?" He shoved Elias hard, making him stumble back a step. "I'll show you who's better." Danny's fist lashed out in a wild haymaker. Glass shattered as someone's drink hit the floor. The crowd surged back with gasps and shouts. The bar erupted into chaos. The bar exploded into motion. Tables screeched across the floor as people scrambled back, creating a circle of space around the fighters. Neon beer signs cast alternating red and blue shadows across faces, frozen in shock and anticipation. Danny came in wild, throwing haymakers fueled by rage and wounded pride. Elias moved like water, smooth, efficient, no wasted motion. He slipped the first punch, redirected the second with an open palm, and planted a precise kick to Danny's outer thigh that made the younger man stumble. "Stay calm, Dad," Mara called from her position near the door. "Control your breathing." Switch darted in from the left, while Ox lumbered forward from the right. A practiced pincer movement. Elias read their rhythm instantly, decades of training crystallizing into pure instinct. He stepped into Switch's space, jamming the attack before it could generate power, then pivoted sharply. Switch's momentum carried him straight into Ox's path. They collided with a grunt of confusion. "That's it!" Geneva's voice rang out as she began pounding her fist on the bar top in a steady rhythm. Show them what discipline looks like. Other elders joined her, creating a thunderous beat that filled the room. Grace kept her tablet steady, capturing everything. Her main camera showed the full scene, while a second angle focused tight on Elias's technique. The live stream counter ticked past 5,000 viewers. Ox recovered first, bellowing as he charged straight at Elias like a freight train. The old master waited until the last possible second before stepping aside, his hand guiding Ox's shoulder just enough to send him crashing into an empty booth. The impact splintered wood and sent glasses shattering to the floor. "Watch the bottle!" Mara screamed as Switch snatched up a broken beer bottle, jabbing it toward Elias's face. But Elias was already moving. His left hand snapped up to catch Switch's wrist, while his right hand clamped down on the elbow. A sharp twist of his hips, and Switch's arm bent in on itself. The bottle clattered to the ground as Switch dropped to his knees, face contorted in pain. Elias released him instantly. Control demonstrated, no further harm needed. Danny had regained his footing, circling now with the trained caution of someone who'd had military combat training. "Not so old after all, huh?" he snarled, testing Elias's defense with quick jabs. "Age gives perspective," Elias replied calmly, blocking each strike with precise movements. "Something you lack." Danny launched a combination: jab, cross, hook. But Elias's defense was impenetrable. Each punch met empty air or was deflected harmlessly aside. Elias countered with surgical strikes to Danny's solar plexus and floating ribs, careful to avoid any headshots. He wasn't here to concuss or permanently damage, only to demonstrate the futility of Danny's chosen path. The crowd had formed a corridor now, phones raised high, as the fight moved toward the back door. Geneva's rhythmic pounding followed them, joined by dozens of others keeping time. It became a pulse, a heartbeat for the unfolding drama. "Remember your training," Miles called out, his voice carrying over the din. "Flow like water." Elias flowed indeed. When Danny overcommitted to a right cross, Elias swept his front leg, sending him stumbling. When Ox tried another bull rush, Elias used the bigger man's momentum to send him spinning into Danny. The gang leader cursed as they untangled themselves. Switch tried to circle behind, but Elias had already anticipated the move. A quick back kick to the knee sent Switch sprawling. No permanent damage, just enough to keep him honest. "You're embarrassing yourself, Danny," Elias said, his breath controlled despite the exertion. "It's not too late to stop." "Shut up!" Danny's composure had completely cracked. He charged forward, throwing everything into a wild assault. Elias met the flurry with precise blocks and parries, giving ground strategically toward the back door. The crowd parted like a wave as the fighters spilled out into the same alley where Danny's crew had ambushed Elias days before. The streetlight buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the wet pavement. Steam rose from a nearby vent, creating an otherworldly atmosphere. Grace followed with her tablet, ensuring both cameras captured every moment. The live stream count had passed 10,000. Elias stood firmly in the center of the light's circle, his navy sweater still pristine despite the chaos. Danny faced him from the shadows, chest heaving. Switch and Ox flanked their leader, but their earlier confidence had evaporated in the face of Elias's skill. "This is where you jumped me," Elias said quietly. "Where you thought numbers made you right." His stance remained relaxed, but ready. "Now everyone sees the truth." The alley fell silent except for ragged breathing, and the distant thrum of Geneva's drumbeat still echoing from inside. The roles had indeed reversed. The predators had become the prey. The victim now stood as living proof that justice could wear a sweater and throw no punches in anger. Danny lunged through the steam, trying to circle behind Elias. His boots scraped against wet pavement as he reached for a chokehold. But Elias had spent decades teaching students to watch for exactly this kind of desperate move. He pivoted smoothly, redirecting Danny's momentum. In one fluid motion, he guided the younger man face down onto the hood of his own black SUV. "Stop fighting," Elias said quietly, maintaining a precise shoulder lock that kept Danny pinned without causing unnecessary pain. "It's over." Switch started forward, but froze when Elias's grip caused Danny to let out an involuntary gasp. Ox shifted his weight uncertainly, his earlier bravado completely deflated. Grace's tablet screen glowed in the darkness as she held it steady. The live stream now showed a split screen. On one side, the current scene with Danny pinned against his vehicle. On the other, footage from days ago showing Danny's crew ambushing Elias in this same alley. The viewer count had exploded past 20,000. "Everyone sees it now," Grace called out, her voice strong despite her trembling hands. Everything. The assault at the bar, the ambush, the threats, the corruption. "It's all live." Sweat dripped down Danny's face onto the SUV's black paint. "You don't understand what you're doing, old man," he growled. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I understand perfectly," Elias replied, maintaining the hold with decades of practiced control. "I'm showing the truth." Footsteps echoed off brick walls as Lieutenant Miles Chen emerged from the shadows, now in full uniform. Two other figures flanked him, a man and woman in plain clothes, badges gleaming on their belts. "State investigators," Miles announced clearly, his voice carrying to the growing crowd. "They've been watching Chief Nolan's department for weeks. Your contracts with Councilman Hale caught their attention." The woman stepped forward, her badge identifying her as Agent Torres. "We've been building a case on corruption and civil rights violations. Tonight's live stream just gave us everything we needed." "You can't," Danny started, but Elias's slight adjustment of the shoulder lock made him stop mid-sentence. More footsteps pounded down the alley as Chief Nolan pushed through the crowd, face red with rage. "Release him immediately," he barked at Elias. "You're under arrest for—" "No, he's not," the male investigator cut in smoothly. "But you, Chief Nolan, are under review for evidence tampering, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Please, step back." The crowd had grown larger, spilling out from the blue rail. Phone cameras glowed like fireflies in the darkness. Geneva's drumbeat had followed them outside, joined by others keeping rhythm on walls and railings. "Dad!" Mara called out. "State police are coming." "Hold steady." Switch and Ox began backing away, but Miles and two uniformed officers who had followed him quickly blocked their escape route. "Nobody leaves," Miles ordered. "This ends properly." Grace zoomed her camera in tight on Danny's face as he lay pinned. "The whole town is watching," she said. "And this time, there's no erasing the evidence." The sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Red and blue lights began to strobe off the wet brick walls, creating a surreal light show in the rising steam. State police cruisers blocked both ends of the alley. "Mr. Whitaker," Agent Torres said formally, "you can release him now. We'll take it from here." Elias maintained the hold for one more moment, leaning close to Danny's ear. "I won't be what you made me fight," he said softly, then released his grip and stepped back with perfect control. Danny slumped against his SUV as state troopers moved in with handcuffs. The metallic clicks seemed to echo off the walls as they secured him, then Switch and Ox in quick succession. The live stream captured every moment in crystal clarity. "Daniel Rourke," the male investigator read formally, "you're under arrest for assault, conspiracy, witness intimidation, and civil rights violations." He continued reading rights as Danny was led toward a waiting cruiser. The crowd's cheers started soft, but swelled quickly, bouncing off the alley walls. Geneva's drumbeat transformed into rhythmic clapping. People pressed forward, reaching to pat Elias's shoulder or squeeze his hand. Mara pushed through and hugged her father tight. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." Chief Nolan stood frozen, watching as his carefully constructed system of corruption crumbled around him. Agent Torres approached him with a grim expression. "We'll need to speak with you as well, Chief." Grace's tablet continued recording as Danny and his crew were loaded into separate cruisers. The split screen told the complete story. The initial assault transformed into justice served, all captured forever in high definition. The steam continued rising around Elias as he stood straight and dignified in his navy sweater. Multiple sirens wailed behind them, their lights painting the scene in alternating red and blue. The crowd's cheering grew louder, a celebration of justice finally served. A week after the live stream, Elias sat at his kitchen table, scanning newspaper headlines spread across the worn wood surface. Local man's viral video exposes town-wide corruption. Private security contracts revealed as cover for harassment. Police chief and councilman under investigation. Grace's footage had done more than capture a fight. It had ripped the lid off years of systematic abuse. The video had spread far beyond their small town, gaining national attention. Major news networks were running segments about small-town corruption and civil rights. Mara poured coffee into her father's favorite mug, the one with karate stance diagrams printed on the side. "Did you see the morning news? They're calling you a dignified warrior for justice. Geneva's been fielding calls from 3 different networks." "I didn't do this for attention," Elias said quietly, folding the newspaper. "I did it because it was right." His phone buzzed. Another text from Miles. The investigation was moving quickly. State prosecutors had frozen Councilman Hale's assets after discovering irregularities in contract payments. The security services Danny's crew provided had been grossly overpriced, with kickbacks flowing through shell companies. "Mr. Whitaker?" Grace called from the front porch. She'd taken to checking on him daily, despite his protests that he was fine. "You should see this." She held up her tablet, showing a live news conference. Chief Nolan stood at a podium, his usual confident swagger replaced by defeated stiffness. Internal messages from his department had leaked. Not explicit slurs, but clear evidence of bias. Messages about keeping certain people in line and protecting the right interests. "I hereby announce my resignation as Chief of Police," Nolan read mechanically. "I apologize for any actions that may have undermined public trust." His eyes never met the camera. Elias watched silently. He took no joy in Nolan's downfall, but felt a deep satisfaction in seeing truth prevail. The system that had protected bullies and punished victims was crumbling. Later that afternoon, Mara drove Elias to the courthouse for Danny's plea hearing. The steps were crowded with reporters and cameras, but they parted respectfully as Elias approached. He declined all interviews, letting the video speak for itself. Inside the courtroom, Danny, Switch, and Ox sat in pressed jail uniforms. Their leather jackets and swagger were gone. Danny's lawyer stood, addressing the judge. "Your Honor, my clients wish to change their plea to guilty on all counts of assault, intimidation, and conspiracy. They've prepared statements of remorse they'd like to read into the record." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Danny stood, paper trembling slightly in his hands. His voice had lost its cruel edge. "I, Daniel Rourke, admit to assaulting Elias Whitaker and participating in a conspiracy to intimidate citizens through abuse of private security contracts. My actions were motivated by prejudice and a false sense of power. I express my sincere remorse to Mr. Whitaker and the community." Switch and Ox followed with similar statements. The judge accepted their pleas and set sentencing for the following month. They would serve state time, not county, away from their local connections. As court adjourned, breaking news alerts lit up phones across the room. Councilman Hale indicted. The state grand jury had handed down charges of procurement fraud, conspiracy, and corruption. Hale's carefully constructed image of civic responsibility had finally shattered. Elias sat quietly through it all, hands folded in his lap. Geneva reached over and patted his arm. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," she whispered, "sometimes through karate." Walking out of the courthouse, Elias ignored the shouted questions from reporters, but a young man stepped forward from the crowd, maybe 25, wearing work clothes. "Mr. Whitaker," he said softly, "my granddad saw your video. He's 82, lives across state. He said you made him proud, made him feel like standing tall again." Elias felt something catch in his throat. He managed a faint smile, humbled by the impact his stand had made. The young man squeezed his shoulder once and disappeared back into the crowd. Mara appeared at his side. "Ready to go home, Dad?" He nodded, watching the reporters chase after Hale's lawyer for comments about the indictment. The crowd's energy was electric with the sense of justice being served, corruption exposed, truth finally breaking through. Grace waited by the car, tablet in hand. "The video just passed 2 million views," she said. "People are sharing it with messages about standing up to bullies, about dignity and courage." "Good," Elias said simply. He settled into the passenger seat, feeling the weight of the past week. His ribs still ached slightly, but his spirit was strong. The town was healing, truth by truth, step by step. They drove past the blue rail, where workers were taking down the old signs. New ownership was coming in, promising changes. The alley where it all happened had been cleaned up, the dumpsters replaced. But the memory of that night, of standing firm, of refusing to break, would linger long after the physical marks faded. 2 months had passed since the courtroom drama. The autumn air carried the scent of fresh paint as people gathered outside the blue rail's newly renovated entrance. A wooden sign, hand-carved and stained deep mahogany, hung proudly above the door. "Respect lives here." Sarah Chen, the new owner and Miles's sister, stood nervously by the entrance. She'd transformed the interior. Better lighting, clean lines, and a long community table where the old pool table used to be. But the biggest change wasn't physical. It was the atmosphere of welcome that now filled the space. "Free coffee for seniors," Sarah announced, pointing to a chalkboard menu. "And we've got a bystander action policy posted by every exit. No one stands alone here anymore." Elias sat at the bar, sipping his usual ginger ale. The spot where Danny had humiliated him now felt different, transformed by truth and consequence. Regular customers nodded respectfully as they passed, some touching his shoulder in quiet acknowledgement. Grace moved between tables with her camera, documenting the reopening for the community TV station. She'd turned her viral video experience into a regular gig, telling local stories of positive change. The lens caught elderly couples sharing coffee, young families enjoying early dinner, and workers still in uniforms gathering for end-of-shift meals. "The town feels different," Mara observed, sliding onto the stool next to her father. "People look each other in the eye now. They speak up when something's wrong." Elias nodded. The changes went beyond the blue rail. Danny and his crew were serving their sentences upstate. Councilman Hale awaited trial under house arrest. The new police chief, recommended by Miles, had implemented community oversight policies. Small steps, but meaningful ones. "Time for class," Elias said, checking his watch. They gathered their things and headed toward St. E. Elijah's Community Hall, where twice-weekly self-defense for seniors classes had become a neighborhood fixture. The church hall hummed with activity. Elderly men and women in comfortable clothes arranged practice mats on the floor. Miles, still in his lieutenant's uniform from his day shift, helped adjust the padding on training dummies. Geneva Parks sat in her usual chair by the door, greeting each arrival with a sharp eye and warm smile. At 80, she'd become the program's fiercest advocate, recruiting participants from every church and senior center in town. "Remember, folks," she called out, "we're not just learning to protect our bodies, we're protecting our dignity." That's what Brother Elias taught us. Mara set up her first aid station in the corner, though they rarely needed more than ice packs and athletic tape. She watched her father move through the room, adjusting stances and offering quiet encouragement. Their relationship had healed alongside the community, old wounds giving way to new understanding. Grace positioned her camera to capture the session. These classes had become popular viewing on the community channel, inspiring similar programs in neighboring towns. She zoomed in as Elias demonstrated a simple wrist release, his movements precise and gentle. "Control starts with breath," he explained, his voice carrying clearly through the hall. "Power isn't about muscle, it's about balance, about knowing your worth and standing your ground." The students, ranging from 60 to 85 years old, paired up to practice. Miles moved among them, sharing techniques he'd learned from Elias decades ago. The sound of shuffling feet and concentrated breathing filled the air. "Good, Mrs. Rodriguez," Elias praised an elderly woman who'd successfully broken a grip on her arm. "You see? Age is no barrier to standing tall." Geneva rose from her chair, tapping her cane for attention. The class paused as she spoke. "Let us pray. Lord, remind us that justice doesn't end with one fight. It begins there. Every day we choose dignity over fear, respect over hatred. We honor your truth." "Amen," the room responded in unison. As the session wound down, Elias walked to a carefully wrapped package leaning against the wall. Inside was his late wife Myra's dojo banner, preserved since her passing 15 years ago. The fabric, though aged, still held its deep blue color. Her hand-painted characters for "Peace Through Strength" bold against the background. With Miles's help, he hung the banner on the wall, its presence transforming the church hall into something more, a place of learning, healing, and community. The evening sun streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the mat-covered floor. "Line up," Elias called softly. The class formed neat rows, backs straight despite aging joints. Miles took his place at the front, beside his old teacher. From outside, the sweet harmonies of the town choir practicing in the main church drifted in, their hymns a peaceful backdrop to this moment of respect. The sounds of their community finding its voice again, stronger for having faced its shadows. Elias looked at the faces before him, not just students, but witnesses to change. Each one had chosen to rise above fear, to learn, to grow. In their eyes, he saw his wife's spirit living on, her belief in dignity and justice flowering in unexpected ways. The class bowed as one. Elias returned the gesture, a smile warming his white beard. In that simple movement lived decades of teaching, months of struggle, and the quiet triumph of truth over power. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.